Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and Little Rock Public Radio.
And hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for being with us. He has spent longer than a dozen years in the State House of Representatives, almost half of them as Speaker. Coming up, a conversation with a man who soon will leave the Speaker's chair and return to a seat on the floor. First, the primary mission of every General Assembly, to include the one that begins short weeks from now. It's the budget, state government's multi-billion-dollar spending plan. The debate, such as it may be, officially began Thursday morning when Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders went before a legislative committee to propose a $6.5 billion general revenue budget for the coming fiscal year. That's an increase of about $182 million that begins next July.
I look forward to working with our legislature to increase spending by only 2.89%. The added funding is directed toward areas we have all agreed are priorities: education, maternal health, public safety, and government efficiency. As you all know, education freedom accounts go universal next school year. Thanks to our hard work to pass the LEARNS Act, for the first time in state history, we are empowering parents to make the decision about where their child can best learn. Interest in the EFA program is high, and it's not a surprise.
$6.5 billion. Andrew DeMillo of the Associated Press, our bureau chief, is with us. Capitol Bureau Chief. Andrew, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
$6.5 billion.
Yeah, it's about a nearly 3% increase in spending, with half of that going toward the education freedom accounts, the school voucher program, and another $90 million being set aside as a reserve for the voucher program. That's where a lot of the discussion was yesterday, and I think we may see more discussion about that in the coming session.
Yeah, the education, the public education establishment, if you will, just loves that program.
I think you're going to have a lot of discussion. One of the loudest critics of the voucher program, Jim Wooten, had a lot of questions for Jim Hudson, the head of DFA, about the programs. He's very skeptical about their claims that they can do both. They can do educational adequacy and still fund public schools adequately, and also do the full rollout of this program. This is going to be fully phased in the 2025-2026 school year. So I think you're going to hear a lot more of questions from him, and also from Democrats and from others who really have concerns about this and are really skeptical about the administration's claims.
Yeah, well, of course, as you know, Mr. Wooten has been skeptical of this from the absolute, and very vocal about it too, from the start. But we've also been hearing in recent weeks from the rural school superintendents who are voicing some skepticism as to whether they will be held harmless by this plan. So opposition, it's more vocal, if not necessarily more powerful at this point.
Yeah, and I think some of the rural areas, you've heard those concerns before, about what impact it's going to have on their schools, especially in terms of areas that don't have the access to private schools as well, right, too. The LEARNS Act passed last year, and
soared through there.
Yeah. And so I think that's kind of an indication, but I think some of the budget discussions and some of the uncertainty that's being raised about it by critics is at least going to put a spotlight on this issue and really focus on it, especially when you see some of the other questions that have come up in other states with similar voucher-like programs.
Yeah, and part of it too is the aid to parochial school. Well, it amounts to aid to parochial schools.
Yeah, I think so. I think you'll see some of the questioning about that, and I think some of the concerns about some of the rollout of the program. I think there'll also be kind of larger questions just about LEARNS as a whole, and how it's being administered. So I think you will see that. I think Wooten's line of questioning was kind of what you're going to end up seeing a lot of from critics during the session, which it may not necessarily slow down or block the governor's proposal for this increased funding, but it at least may put more of a spotlight on it, and may at least give kind of a platform for critics to kind of point out these concerns about what this means going forward and whether this is going to be sustainable in the long run.
More and more, there's a willingness to at least raise those questions anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, in the previous session there was healthcare, another big one, a huge responsibility of state government, and the governor in her message made note of maternal health. She had a task force. It did not. But no word on the Medicaid expansion for maternal health benefits. Anyway.
Yeah, and the governor has opposed the expansion of those benefits before.
The postpartum.
Yeah,
benefits.
the postpartum benefits. But her budget includes around I think $13 million for some of these proposals that came from this task force that she had put together, where she had said basically it said these are areas that she'd rather focus on that she thinks have a bigger impact. There's going to be another run at trying to get the expanded benefits through. I think we've already seen legislation on that. And the fact that Arkansas is kind of the holdout state on this, there may be more discussion on it. I think you're also going to see discussion about Medicaid as a whole. There's $100 million in surplus money that was set aside. And we're going into a session where there's kind of uncertainty about Medicaid throughout the country. We have a new presidency coming in, and Republicans have supported things like block grants, right. Trying again with work requirements for Medicaid. So that uncertainty may kind of shade some of the discussion, and Arkansas and other states that want to enact some of these measures may be kind of in a holding pattern to see what gets through, what can they do, and what is their support for, in the legislature. Yeah,
there was some discussion, well, as you mentioned anyway, some discussion in committee yesterday about the possibility of significant changes from Washington, from a new presidential administration. But it wouldn't be imminent. It would take time to make so everyone has a bit of breathing room, at least at the state level.
Yeah, and you're looking at it,
policymakers. I mean.
Yeah, and you're looking at a president who's come in and has proposed major changes. Proposed abolishing the Department of Education. Has proposed these major changes in Medicaid. Yeah. But it's going to require legislation at the federal level. There's going to be rulemaking. So that really kind of puts them in the holding pattern on it to figure out what's the timeline on it, what's going to get through. So you may not see some of these major changes get through, or if you do, you may at least see kind of just the initial discussion and kind of the waiting game to see what happens from Washington.
Yeah, the loyal opposition, the decidedly minority Democratic Party in both chambers anyway, immediately announced reservations, or actually opposition, I think, to some key elements of the administration's program. There's not a lot they can do to slow it down unless they can bring some Republicans along.
Yeah. I think when you look at the numbers right now, this is an overwhelmingly Republican legislature. So Democrats, their biggest hope right now is at least, if they can't find areas of bipartisan support, and there may be some areas like, some of the opposition to vouchers, but even that's going to be difficult in terms of fighting that. They can at least kind of try to put a spotlight on things. I think you saw that the first day of the filing period, House Minority Leader Andrew Collins filed just a flurry of bills, and it's kind of in some of the areas that they've talked about. But their concern overall on the budget is what you would expect. They're concerned about the amount of money going toward the education freedom accounts. They're concerned about the impact of the tax cuts that have been enacted, and they're worried that this money is basically could be going toward other needs that have not been funded at the levels that they say need to be over the past few years.
Looking back at the first couple of years of Ms. Sanders' tenure, she got just about everything she wanted except major changes to the FOI. What's the thinking out there now, or the mood out there now? Is the legislature still as amenable as it was?
I think
she's still in a honeymoon.
I think somewhat. I think the pushback that there was, which I think took some legislative leaders off guard, in terms of that widespread changes, cutting off a huge amount of public records from the public, I think may still be a difficult sell. She was able to get some things through, in terms of travel records, security records, and that was a lot more of kind of a narrower argument in terms of safety. So I think some changes, if they're framed that way, might be able to get through. We haven't seen anything in terms of any proposals from her. We don't know if she's going to pursue that, but I know there are some lawmakers who would be open to further changes. I don't know if it would be kind of the wholesale cutting off of records that we saw a push for previously.
Yeah, and there was an immediate pushback, and not just from the media, but from other elements of the corporate community as well, particularly the bar.
Yeah, and and even conservative activists, were appearing before them and saying, these are records that are generated by the government's paid for by taxpayers.
Tax dollars.
Yeah, and so I think some of that pushback, I think they were somewhat surprised by that it wasn't just a media pushback over this.
Yeah. All right, Andrew DeMillo of the Associated Press, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
And we'll have you back. And we'll take a break and come back in a moment with the Speaker. And we're back. Matthew Shepard's time at the state capitol began 14 years ago with his first term as a state representative from El Dorado. For the past 6 years, he has been the presiding officer of the House, the first member to serve 3 terms as Speaker. Come the turn of the year, Matthew Shepard will surrender the chair, but not his district, having chosen to step aside as Speaker while continuing as one of the chamber's senior-most members. Speaker Shepard joins us now for some thoughts on the state of the state and its legislature. Mr. Speaker, thanks very much as always for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve.
Why step aside?
Well, as you alluded to, I've served as Speaker for 3 terms, a little over 3 terms, as I filled out Speaker Gillum's term. So I've been Speaker for 6.5 years. That's longer than anybody else in the history of the state. And ultimately, even though having support for another term, I just felt like it was the right thing to do. I know Speaker Designate Evans is going to do a great job, and I like the idea of being able to serve my final term and represent my district from the House floor, and I think it'll be a great opportunity as well for Speaker Designate Evans to lead the House.
And it will be your final term because you are, for a while anyway, it will be your final. Conceivably, you could go back.
That's correct. It will be my final term under the term limits that have been put in place. That it's kind of changed over time, but for my class, this would be our final term. You can sit out for 4 years and then potentially run for the legislature in the future. But look forward to serving my final term. Excited for the opportunity. It's always a great honor anytime you have the opportunity to get to represent your constituents in Little Rock.
Looking back on it, is there something that you would single out? 1, 2, 3 things that you would single out that, yeah, we got this done?
Well, there's a lot of things. I've started just over the last few months, as I think about things that we've accomplished or issues that we've dealt with, started kind of making notes on my phone just of things that we've been able to do. It's hard to narrow it down, but I would say that probably the top 2 or 3 things. One, I think of when I was elected Speaker and I was elevated to Speaker when Speaker Gillum took a job here at UCA.
Right.
The big discussion was ethics, and you'll recall that we had in the legislature, we had some former members that had done some things wrong. And so that was really the most pressing issue. And at the time, what I committed to was to really set that standard for the legislature to hold ourselves accountable, to do things the right way, to do things that are legal, moral, and ethical. And not just that, but to also make sure that all of our appearances in terms of how we conduct ourselves are at the highest standard. And I think that we've been able to set that standard. It's not just personal to me, but really with our leadership team and throughout the House, I think that you've seen a commitment to that. And so first and foremost, if we're not doing things the right way, if we're not doing things ethically, then all the other stuff doesn't matter. And so I'm really proud of that. Beyond that, we've cut a lot of taxes. We've allowed Arkansans to keep more of what they earn. We've passed some of the biggest tax cuts in the history of the state. The top rate when I came into the House was at 7%. Now it's down to 3.9%. We provided relief to all Arkansans. And then on top of that, I think back to we've really tried to address highway funding. That, as you know, every 2 years there was always this discussion about how are we going to fund our highways. You haven't had that discussion in the last several years because we've been able to really address that. We've been able to, at least in the near term, been able to provide the funding that's necessary. And so those are the things that really stand out. But I could sit here all day and talk about the things that not just I've been a part of, but the legislature has been a part of over the last number of years to really improve the lives of all Arkansans.
Regrets?
I don't know. There's probably things here or there where maybe in hindsight I wish I would have handled things differently. But generally, I try to look ahead and try to learn from any mistakes that maybe we've made along the way. So there's nothing that I would sit back and say that is a regret, because all those things, ultimately, it's a learning process in life, and certainly in the legislature. You learn from those things, and it's been great to be able to work with the membership across the board. Well,
feel free now to discuss those things that you might have done differently, as you put it.
I don't. As I sit here today, I think that you can always do a better job communicating. I think that when you look to the legislature, whenever there are generally flare-ups in the General Assembly or at the Capitol, it comes back to either a miscommunication, a lack of communication. And so I think there's always room for improvement there. We've tried to be very transparent with how we've handled things from a leadership perspective. We've tried to, and one of the things I should have mentioned that I'm really proud of is that we've created greater transparency when it comes to the committee processes, and that now virtually all of our committees are being streamed online. And I think that's a real benefit, because that allows folks all across the state of Arkansas to be able to tune in and see the legislature at work. And that also helps the legislature from the standpoint of being able to get the feedback from our constituents across the state.
Yeah, in terms of communications, I'm just surmising here, there's almost inevitable. It is inevitable. There are tension between the chambers, House and Senate, Senate and House. Does that fall into that category, communication, or just simply differing values there, differing approaches?
Well, I think it's a challenge. When you're in the legislature, you have 135 members, 100 on the House end, 35 on the Senate end. There's always going to be some tension. It's part of our system of government. There's always going to be a bit of tension between House and Senate. I've been very pleased with our ability to work with the Senate. I think that if you look at the Arkansas legislature, you see that there's good camaraderie across the board, and that we're able to come together, not just in the House, but from a House and Senate perspective, we're able to come together for the benefit of the people of Arkansas. One of the challenges, I think, from a leadership perspective is that being a part of the process of having the meetings and working through policy discussions. You can't have all 135 folks there at the same time, right? So there's always this discussion. There's always at the Capitol. There's always folks that speculate. Oh, what discussions are going on here? What have I not been a part of? And so one of the things that we tried to do from my leadership team perspective is try to make sure that people know what's going on. We put those broad policy. Is we took up big issues. We tried to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to debate those issues. One of the things that was really important to me is to have that debate, to have that discussion, that we could take a vote. Maybe we disagree. Maybe there are votes on both sides of the issue. But then kind of going back to my background as a lawyer is that, you debate, you take the vote, and then you move on to the next issue. And so that's one of the things that I'm really proud of in terms of that civility, the consensus we've been able to generate, and also to be able to take on issues day in and day out.
In terms of fiscal policy, well, Thursday morning we get a new budget proposal for the coming biennium. We don't have bienniums anymore, but for the coming fiscal year in July from the governor. She submitted a new budget. Your first thoughts on that? You got to tackle that in January. Well, now, for that matter, hearings on the
That's right. I think it's a very conservative and fiscally responsible budget, and I think that it addresses some of the needs that we have as a state, and that I think that it's something that is going to be well manageable. I think it's going to be well received by the General Assembly. There's always going to be discussion about issues here or there. I don't know that there's anything that stands out as maybe a glaring point of debate. I think it's going to be well received. Speaker-designate Evans will get the opportunity to take the lead on that in the House. But I think that it's consistent with, one of the things that you've seen from the General Assembly is to try to put forth a conservative budget that allows Arkansas to be strong, for our fiscal house to be strong, for us to be able to continue to have the opportunity to cut taxes, while at the same time we've been able to build up a catastrophic reserve fund and be able to provide the essential services in a more efficient fashion.
Yeah, what about communication between the General Assembly, the leadership, and the second floor, the governor's office? Are you satisfied with that?
I've been satisfied with that. I've enjoyed working with Governor Sanders, a fellow Ouachita graduate, and I think she's done a great job leading our state. I think that now that she's approaching the third year of her governorship, I expect that we're going to see more bold ideas put forth by her, and I think that you've seen that generally the ideas and policies she's put out there have been well received by the General Assembly, and I've been proud to partner with her on so many of those things.
You mentioned fiscal responsibility and fiscal stability, like we're preparing to build a new prison. There's the LEARNS Act, which I think in this new budget she's setting aside an additional almost $200 million, I think, for that. Any regrets based on that, and the maternal program too? Any regrets, any second thoughts, put it that way, on tax reduction?
I don't think so. I think we've cut taxes in a very responsible manner. And when you look back, I mentioned at the outset that over my time in the House, we've reduced the top rate. We've cut, good night, we're probably approaching about $2 billion on an annual basis in terms of tax relief. If you recall, in my first session as a member of the General Assembly in the minority party, I was lead sponsor of Arkansas' sales tax holiday that provides tax relief to Arkansans as they prepare to go back to school. I think that what you've seen is that we've taken a very conservative approach, but it's also been a very pragmatic approach. We haven't tried to do too much too fast. In fact, if you look back a few years ago, instead of utilizing triggers to trigger in tax cuts, we kind of set up kind of a safety net type situation, but in actuality, our revenues were so strong that we were able to move those tax cuts forward. And so I think that that's what you'll continue to see. I think you'll continue to see a legislature that wants to continue to work towards allowing Arkansans to keep more of what they earn, but at the same time to do so in a pragmatic manner that's not going to overextend our state. And when you think about the tax cuts that we've provided in the meantime, we've generated surpluses for the state. We've built up over a $1.5 billion catastrophic reserve fund that if there is a downturn, we have something that's out there that will be able to help shore us up.
Got about a minute remaining, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to use it this way. We are obviously in polarizing political times right now. Your party, the Republican Party, in both chambers has supermajority, so you pretty much do what you wish if you all hold together. Is there any concern on your part that perhaps the collegiality factor in the General Assembly might suffer owing to these passionate arguments?
Well, I think that there's always a concern. We live in a time, and I think a lot of this is attributable to social media, that is elevated and maybe creates a more impassioned political debate. I think it is something that we have to work on, but I'm really proud of here in the state of Arkansas, and particularly, obviously, the House is what I'm most familiar with. In the House, we've been able to conduct ourselves in a very collegial and professional manner. Yesterday, I hosted a group from the El Dorado Chamber, a leadership group that was in the House chamber, and I visited with them, and it just so happened that House Minority Leader Andrew Collins came walking through the chamber, and I shared with my constituents from back home that in the Arkansas House, we're able to get along. We're able to work across party lines. There are several thousand bills that are filed in any given session. Are some of them going to break down along party or ideological lines? Yes, there are some, and those are the ones that get a lot of attention. But by and large, most of what we take up are things that generate broad consensus that have support across party lines. And look, I'm a proud Republican. I'm proud to advocate for conservative policies and conservative issues. My message to the General Assembly, my message to the House is let's debate, let's vigorously and passionately debate those issues. Let's take the vote, and then let's move on to the next issue.
Got to end it there, sir, because we're simply out of time. Mr. Speaker, we thank you for yours.
Thank you.
This program and in the previous years. We'll see you in the next session.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
And that does it for us for this edition. As always, thank you for watching. See you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and Little Rock Public Radio.